Hello viewers, you joined me for a video I've been meaning to make for some time now, and I've finally got the opportunity. Basically, when you are either a former Jehovah's Witness or a Jehovah's Witness, you'll know that leaving the religion isn't a straightforward thing. You essentially are given two choices: either disfellowship or disassociate, or fade by becoming inactive. But is it as simple as just fading and becoming inactive and no longer being bothered? Well, I am joined by two people who have experiences that suggest that it isn't that straightforward. I'm joined by Jill Long from Indiana and Vince Deporter from Arizona. Thanks for joining me, guys.
My pleasure.
So I guess we'll start with you, Vince, because your story is still very raw, and I guess you're still processing it to some extent. But you and I have been friends for a while now, and I think I even was involved in interviewing you for a podcast once. It's been no secret that you have very strong views against Watchtower, and yet it's only recently, am I right, that Watchtower came after you?
Yes, I got away with it for about 8 years. What happened was, do you want me to explain what happened exactly in a nutshell?
Please, yeah.
In a nutshell, for 8 years, my mom and sister, because I have never been disfellowshipped, and I faded, as I thought was, the most dignified way to do it. I was wrong. My mom and sister played on the fact that I was not disfellowshipped as a technicality to keep on talking with me. Everything was fine, like nothing happened. We avoided the subject of the truth, as they say, because of course we would get to heated discussions, but it never ruined our relationship until recently, where there's an elder that maybe innocently just wanted to see who I was because of my work, my drawings, the books I do and stuff like that. I don't know. But he was shocked to see the interviews I did and my videos, of course, that are quite apostate flavored. So he was shocked, and he went to see my mom and basically told my mom and sister that they shouldn't talk to me because it's shocking how apostate I am. So,
am I right in saying that your mum and sister aren't in America?
No, they're in France. They're in the south of France. So
this is a French elder who hunted you down, essentially.
Exactly. I will say this, though, as opposed to other, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, it's not as hard probably for me than it is for those who have to live in the same city. Okay. They are, thousands of miles away, but it still doesn't, it still hurts emotionally.
And you still had a relationship with them?
Yes. Every 2 times a week, my mom would call. I'd call my sister. We'd Skype. We were apart mile-wise, but thanks to online Skype and other stuff like that, we were always in contact on a weekly basis maximum. So,
and give us some idea of how long you've been kind of, let's say, vocal about your thoughts about Watchtower. How many years roughly would you say that was?
I would say 10 years. I started, it's funny, I became an atheist before I became aware of the Watchtower Society. It was doing a talk on the deluge that got me to question all of a sudden it just fell, hit by the grace of reason, if I may say it like that. I quickly became an atheist because since I'm 12 years old, I had doubts, but you know how it is. They pat you on the back, you do good talks, you preach well, you're a pioneer. So you are so part of the community and you invest so much emotionally that you forget to question what you started questioning and you just let it go until you can't. And so I became an atheist before I started looking at the society, the governing body as a whole. I was never okay with the blood issue. And to say a little secret, I've always talked to this fellowship a little bit on purpose. I was a little bit of a rebellious person. So I never shunned anybody. So I probably hurts more that my mom and sister do shun me now. But they listened to that elder, to make a long story short, and my mom called me once to say that she wasn't going to talk to me anymore, and my sister emailed me once to say that she won't talk to me anymore until I come back to the truth. And I said, good luck with that.
Wow.
So I'm dead in their eyes. Before, I've already had triple bypass, and I've had 3 heart attacks, stents, all you want. But now I feel I'm really dead to their eyes.
Incredible. And Jill, you were telling me that your fade was interrupted when you put up some Christmas lights. Is that correct?
That's right. We'd been inactive for nearly 5 years, and we weren't trying necessarily to fade, but we seemed to not be getting any attention. So we thought we were okay. Our Christmas tree was in the back of the house, so I know nobody saw that except perhaps my parents, although they weren't really having much to do with us at that time. But my husband made the decision, and I agreed with him, to hang some lights on our porch. My parents always hung lights around their swimming pool, but, it was a different season. And it seemed that we got away with it until about mid to late January. We had not taken them down, and knock, 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 here come 2 elders to our front door.
And of course, the significance of there being 2 elders is that there is then 2 witnesses to to observe your defiance in having these lights. So incredible. Now, how many? Just to kind of back up a little bit, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the witnesses and what brought you to kind of distance yourself from the religion.
I'm a 4th generation witness, so I have great grandparents on both sides. I had anointed an aunt that I remember watching her partake when I was young. So, for me, it was just a legacy. Now, my husband was a little different. He was converted when he was 10, and we married when I was not quite 19 and he was 21. So, it's just what you did. And we ended up having 4 sons. And this was about 2000 when things began to kind of break down for us. Do you want me to go on in?
No, that's fine. So around 2000, you presumably stopped attending meetings. You stopped going on the field service. Was it like a conscious parting of the ways, or had you just run out of steam?
That's a very good way of putting it, because I think at that point we were exhausted. My husband was trying to change career fields from one that was very physically challenging to the computer field that he's in now. And I took a job at the library to help support that. So, it was difficult to make the meetings, and your status is totally all about not just my meeting attendance, but more importantly, my husband's meeting attendance. And so a lot of times I was struggling by myself with these 4 boys. 2 of them were in the ministry school, and there were several things that happened that kind of got us questioning, but more importantly, just tired of the way we were being treated. And my husband stopped first, and I stopped shortly after because I just couldn't do it. And it was more of a break at first.
Okay. And did there come a point where the break became a little bit more than a break, and you kind of, put 2 and 2 together?
Yes and no. In all honesty, it was just a matter of wanting to feel normal. All my life, I wanted to feel normal. And I was working with these people, and they were having, birthdays and doing Christmas stuff. And at first I abstained, but as we became inactive, I became a little more participatory and that kind of thing. And we did have some questions and some doubts, but I wasn't looking too hard until we were actually disfellowshipped. And that's really what set me off. And that's when I read Crisis of Conscience, and they stoked the fires. And I told my mother that if they'd have just left us alone, but I guess in a way I'm glad they didn't, because it really did free us. But it's been hard.
That's fascinating, because Actually, the heavy-handedness kind of pushed you out. You know, you've just said there that you probably would still be a JW now, at least in name, if it wasn't for the fact that they were so aggressive in kind of holding you to account for what amounts to just some flickering lights.
Yes. One incident in particular that kind of broke the camel's back for my husband was while he was struggling to attend and he was praying and asking for help. He was at a meeting and he was in a conversation with another brother, and an elder came up to him and began chastising him for his poor meeting attendance. He was humiliated. It was so hard for him to understand. Rather than being commended because he was there, it was like an opportunity to chastise him for not.
Wow. And just to give us some idea of timescale, so it was, Vince just told us it was roughly 10 years that he'd been outspoken. In your case, you said that you stopped attending meetings in 2000. How long was it before you were disfellowshipped?
We were disfellowshipped in 2005, so not quite 5 years, I think, from the time that we stopped attending to when we were officially disfellowshipped.
Interesting. Vince, were you surprised that they came for you? I mean, presumably after 10 years of speaking out against the organization, I'm guessing that you kind of felt almost as though they'd lost interest in you. Did it surprise you when they came for you?
It totally surprised me because you get comfortable, you know. It's a status quo that works where you can get along with your mom and sister, and it works fine. And it's a status quo, and it took 9 years before, 10 years before this happened. And I never, this is something important, I never lied to my mom and sister. I often said I was an apostate and that I did videos. I admitted that to them to make sure I wasn't doing it behind their back. And my mom would always say, no, you're not an apostate. You're an apostate. But I was. And she had to have an elder hand her the truth about my apostasy. You know.
So it sounds as though your mother was very accommodating. And this is one of the things that I think, because quite often, I think the thing with shunning and disfellowshipping is that you have to be ordered to do it. It's so counterintuitive, especially to a parent, to kind of sever that link with a child. I mean, Jill, you've just told us that you've got 4 boys. Could you ever imagine kind of not talking to them for any reason?
Absolutely not. They are a big reason why. Sorry, I can't quite hear myself, but it sounds like my voice is issues. But my sons were a big reason why my personal decision was to stop going, because of the way they were being treated. And I couldn't fathom treating them the way I had been, or in the past. I'd actually been disfellowshipped once before when I was a teenager. So I knew what that was like.
Was it kind of, when you were disfellowshipped, what kind of impact did it have on you? Were you already being shunned to a degree, or were there friendships that you had with people in the congregation that just suddenly ended, or what was the story there?
It was very gray area. I mean, there were those like my husband's father. As soon as he heard that Gary even had doubts, he was done. But my parents are very gray line, and in fact, threw an anniversary party for us after we'd celebrated Christmas, but before we were disfellowshipped. And it was almost like it was a blackmail, warning shot.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's kind of gray who would talk to us and who wouldn't.
And Vince, I know, I mean, you and I follow each other. In fact, we all follow each other on social media. And I can recall when all this was happening, I think it was a few weeks ago now. Maybe you can fill in roughly when this happened, but I'm just interested in knowing kind of psychologically how it's affected you and how you're holding up.
Well, I feel a little bit embarrassed for what I'm going to say, but in my character, when somebody does me harm, I don't wish them harm. However, I have this thing in my head, in my heart, it turns off. And I'm afraid of that, because we're talking about my mom and sister here. But once they decided that I was dead in their eyes and that they blackmailed me as a condition for me to talk to them to become, again, a Jehovah's Witness, something turned off. And I'll be honest with you, my mom and sister suffer way more than I do to shun me. I know them enough to know that they are devastated, and I'm not. It's like all of a sudden they just, something in my brain turned off, my heart turned off. I'm a little bit ashamed to say that, because it sounds cold, and I don't think I'm a cold person. I think it's just self-protection.
Yeah, and I can relate to that, because obviously I've been on the receiving end of my fair share of shunning.
For sure.
And I think what I find most frustrating is the way that disfellowshipping is kind of pitched as being like a loving provision, and they kind of openly admit to the blackmail element, and they say, well, we're doing this so that you'll feel motivated to come back. But in the case of my family members who are shunning me, they know full well I ain't coming back. There isn't really a conceivable way that I could come back. Even if I kind of feigned reverence for the organization, I don't think it would even be that simple to just kind of start going through the reinstatement process for someone like me, which means that their shunning of me doesn't really have a therapeutic element to it. It's purely spite. And in your instance, Vince, I think there's a bit that the same can be said there as well. They're shunning you more out of spite than as a genuine attempt at making you rethink your actions.
Yeah, I don't want to play the game. I mean, it's simple. I have discovered very painfully to my own faith that my faith was misplaced, that my trust in the Bible was wrong. That's me. I'm not saying everybody has to agree with me on that. I am now an atheist. I'm actually more a vocal atheist than I am a vocal ex-Jehovah's Witness, as you know. I talk more about religion versus reason, and that's debatable. But my main thing in my life is epistemology, which means my passion in life is how we know what we think we know and what sources we trust and why. And that's why they'll never see me back. I mean, it is obvious to me that all of it is bullshit, and that the society in itself, the Watchtower Society, is incredibly dreadful and rotten from the inside. And of course, the child abuse is just one of the problems, but it's one that is very glaring to me and to everybody, I think,
And Jill, before we went on air, we were talking a little bit about having you on, because I actually made a Facebook post to find who'd had a similar experience to Vince, and you were one of the ones who replied, and you gave your story about Christmas tree lights, and amazingly, even on that Facebook thread, you weren't the only one who'd been hunted down by elders for putting up Christmas tree lights. And when we were talking off air just before we started this video, you brought up the comments by Jeffrey Jackson at the Australian Royal Commission. And just to refresh our memories, I'm just going to play a clip of what Jeffrey Jackson said when given the hypothetical scenario of someone putting up Christmas tree lights. Take a look.
And so, for example, if they had become inactive or sought to fade without formally dissociating, and the elders came to visit and found them celebrating Christmas or a birthday, they would be found to be in transgression of the rules, would they not?
That is not my understanding, but again, as I said, it's not my field. That goes into policy with regard to those type of things. But from my personal experience, that's not the case.
So guys, I'll let you wade in on that. Does that square up with your personal experience?
You can go, Jill.
Okay. Well, it was really interesting because my experience happened before the Australian Royal Commission, and I was glued to every bit of that. And I was furious because that's pretty much exactly what happened to us. We were inactive for almost 5 years. And like I said, our Christmas tree was in the back of the house. It was really just Christmas lights on the porch that drew them in and got us disfellowshipped. And when Jeffrey Jackson said that, I even had other people who'd heard my story who it reminded them of me when they heard that. It was like, no, that's what we did, and it didn't save us. So
Indeed. I think you know, you can weigh in on this, Vince. That's probably for me one of the most frustrating elements of the whole shunning, disfellowshipping policy, is the fact that they don't own up to it when push comes to shove, and they'll make kind of statements to the effect that, oh, you're free to leave. Does that frustrate you as it does me when they just flat out deny or water things down?
It does. It does. I watched that mission over and over again. I spent hours and hours and hours watching it all over again. But the worst was, I thought, Jeffrey Jackson. He reminded me of the old guy on the right in the Muppet Show, you know, but not funny at all, you know. He was lying out of his, you know, it was incredible to hear him talk and to deny shunning, to deny the fact that there was a problem, then admitting there was a problem with the pedophile issue with the Watchtower Society. But it was incredible to see how any witness, as faithful as he or she can be, can watch that and not see the hypocrisy. It's mind-blowing to me.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm really glad that we could go over this together, because I'm actually hoping that this will kind of develop into like a series of videos, because I think it's an aspect of leaving the religion that isn't very often explored. You do like to think that there is safety in just fading away, in just stopping attending meetings, and that they'll leave you alone. But as is quite clearly the case with you guys, they don't leave you alone, and in Vince's case, go to extraordinary lengths across different country, across national boundaries, to hunt someone down. So if there's anyone watching who's been watching this video, who's kind of weighing up how to proceed, whether to make a clean break or whether to fade, I mean, obviously there's lots of different circumstances to factor in, but do you have any words of advice for someone who's contemplating leaving? If you go first, Jill, maybe that would be easiest.
Yeah, they really did lure us into a sense of security, because they had tried to get with us early on, but then not for a long time. And when they showed up at the door, I still didn't really believe they were going to disfellowship us. And this was done through registered letter. And I actually ended up asking my father if we'd been disfellowshipped, because I didn't know. And I've had other people who have said, oh, well, you know, it's been 3 years. I'm sure they'll leave us alone. And I've said, no, don't count on it. But my parents lived in the same town. With Vince's example of different country, that just blows my mind. But if you do not play by their rules, they will not ever leave you alone until they have completely discarded you. Yeah, my advice would be do what's right for you, whether you want to show up at your judicial and try to explain, or if you want to play ostrich like we did and pretend like they don't exist. Just do what you feel like is what you need to do for closure.
Indeed. And Vince,
Yeah,
do you have
I
any
agree.
thoughts?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Jill. You have to do what, for example, for years, I did not want to bend to the Watchtower's standards and send a letter. And then I realized that, hey, I'm still counted as a Jehovah's Witness because, you know, I'm still, you know, officially just inactive. So I decided to write a letter after all. And besides, I know that in France, which is weird, and I think Jill will laugh about this too, it's weird to know that you will be disfellowshipped in your own congregation, I don't know, like 4,000 miles away in another country, because I know that I'm waiting for an email of my sister that will be just to tell me I'm disfellowshipped, which isn't it funny? I mean, I used to be a staple of that congregation. I was a pioneer. I was doing talks. So I expect that, but isn't it ironic? So like Jill says, do what you feel comfortable. There is no. This is my bottom line. There is no way to leave this cult with your dignity. No way.
I agree.
So whatever you do, you're going to lose.
Indeed. Well, words of wisdom from both of you. In fact, I just couldn't help but think when you were speaking then, Vince, you said that they were still counting you. In a way, they weren't, because when they publish the yearly figures, and as we know, the figures are slightly less comprehensive now than they were only a year ago. But when they publish the yearly figures, they're publishing the figures of people who are actually engaged in the preaching work. So when you think of the figure of 8 million, they're not counting people who are inactive. They can't, because they're not involved in the preaching. So it's this, what they're kind of rather sadistically and fanatically holding on to is just the principle of the fact that you were once baptized as a Jehovah's Witness and don't get to, like you say, leave with your dignity. And that's what's shocking. And I'm grateful to the two of you for kicking off what I hope will be an interesting series of videos, just to see the extent of the fanaticism when it comes to hunting people down and treating them this way. So thank you to both of you for joining me.
It was my
Thank
pleasure.
you. Yep, it was great. Thank you.
Okay, so viewers, I hope you have enjoyed this discussion. I know I did. Please don't forget to subscribe for similar videos. And as always, thank you for watching.